Ladies and gentlemen, please remain standing for the presentation of colors and the playing of the national anthem.
Please be seated. I'm Dave Barham, Administrator of GSA, and on behalf of the U.S. General Services Administration, welcome to the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center. It's an honor to be here with our distinguished guests, President Clinton, His Excellency Kingsley C.A. Lane, former First Lady Nancy Reagan, William M. Daley, Secretary of Commerce, Carol Browner, Administrator, Environmental Protection Agency, Harriet Babbitt, Deputy Administrator, Agency for International Development, Senator Strom Thurmond, Senator Daniel Moynihan, Senator Trent Lott, Senator Charles Robb, Congressman Steny Hoyer, Congressman Tom DeLay, Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, Senator Bob Dole, George Shultz, General Colin Powell, Mayor Marion Barry Jr., Samuel Banks, Dean Anderson, Ken Sparks, John Tidings, Guy Tazzoli, Richard Hauser, John Drew, and Catherine Graham. Welcome to the members of Congress and the diplomatic corps who are with us today. I'd also like to recognize GSA Public Buildings Commissioner Bob Peck, Nelson Alcalde, Beth Newberger, Mickey Femino, and all the other GSA employees who contributed to making today's spectacular event possible. It's a special honor for me, personally, to be here today. Washington, D.C. has become a second home to me and my wife, Joan. Like many of you, I spent much of my life somewhere else. We came to Washington from California about 5 years ago. And while I was not here when President Kennedy walked down Pennsylvania Avenue, I am proud to be here as we dedicate this building. Today, we complete the 100-year-old plan to develop the district's Federal Triangle, and we complete President Kennedy's vision for the revitalization of America's Main Street. We also pay tribute to President Reagan and his vision. He said, "The freer the flow of world trade, the stronger the tides for human progress and peace among nations." This International Trade Center was built to serve as a platform for international trade, and it will help American business, particularly medium and small businesses, compete in the global marketplace. Many people directly contributed to making those visions a reality. Senator Moynihan sponsored the legislation authorizing the building, and Senator Bob Dole sponsored the legislation naming this building after President Reagan. Our architect, James Ingo Fried, with Paycobb Fried Partners, in association with Ellerby Beckett, designed a wonderful building. And our developer, William Zeckendorf Jr., President, Federal Triangle Corporation, with Perini Corporation as construction manager, built it. You have been terrific partners. This complex shows how American architects and builders can make a mere building connect people and trade, two critical parts of our democracy. And I'd also like to recognize 11 people who actually worked every day to build this magnificent structure. These 11 people represent 8,000 people who brought the structural concrete and steel, stone, roof, utilities, skylights, ductwork, elevators, floor and wall tiles, and interior finishes together. They are Rick Alley, Connie Bramlett, Catherine Bryant, Craig DeJesus, Frank Hackett, Jacques Hood, Jerry Martinez, Ron McIlvain, Robert Redden, Ken Wyman, and Richard Warner. And I would ask you to stand, please. Because of their work, we are here today in a building that is much more than just limestone, concrete, glass, and fixtures. This building tells the citizens who use it or see it something about themselves, something about their government, something about their nation, and something about their world. And in doing that, it helps unite us as a community, locally, nationally, and globally. The Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center demonstrates two of our highest priorities: a functional building and one in harmony with the community. Public buildings are legacies shared by employees, visitors, the community, the nation, and the world. Part of that legacy is the tradition of government architecture. The design and construction of government buildings is based on lasting value. Our designs are urban-minded and regionally sensitive. And public-private partnerships, such as the one in this building between federal agencies and the International Trade Center, play an important role in the vitality of our nation's cities. President Clinton and Vice President Gore have been consistent in their commitment to our urban areas. I am especially proud of the work going on in our nation's capital. This complex contributes to that rejuvenation. The Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center stands for the ages. 50 years, 100 years, more than that from now, our citizens will look at this building and marvel at its grandeur and scope. It is a building which wondrously allows us to give concrete expression to our most cherished ideals of democracy, community, and economics. We at GSA are proud to be a part of such a powerful legacy. So to all of our federal and private sector partners and to the GSA employees who contributed so much to this partnership and to our crown jewel of Pennsylvania Avenue, I say thank you. Congratulations to you all who have built a building that will make our spirits soar. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next three speakers, distinguished leaders who represent the kind of leadership that it takes to conceive, build, and use well a building of this majesty. First will be DC Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton. Her advocacy for the economic vitality of the nation's capital made her an important supporter for this building, which will contribute $45 million annually to the local economy. She will be followed by Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who shared President Kennedy's vision of a main street in the nation's capital, which would honor its citizens. And finally, William M. Daley, Secretary of Commerce, who has championed the importance of the International Trade Center housed in this building. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Barham, President Clinton, Ms. Reagan, Senator Moynihan, Secretary Daley, members of the Senate and the House, distinguished platform guests and other distinguished visitors, ladies and gentlemen. The people of the District of Columbia join the people of the United States of America in welcoming and applauding the most important building to be constructed in the city since the Great Depression. We are grateful to Senator Pat Moynihan, the author of S. 1550, signed by President Ronald Reagan in 1987, that gives the United States a trade center in its capital, as in virtually every other leading country, and to the International Cultural and Trade Commission, whose members worked for years to see this large project through. Senator Moynihan not only had the vision to facilitate and the tenacity to lead the revival of Pennsylvania Avenue, he had the good sense to understand that the avenue had to be crowned with a magnificent building, and that the best deal for the taxpayers, for the most desirable and the most underused property in Washington, was not a parking lot. Thank you, Senator Moynihan. Mr. President, there is only one other, even roughly similar policy, the 55-acre federally owned Southeast Federal Center, a stone's throw from the Capitol, awaiting development, that will save the federal government billions of dollars in rents if we insist that federal agencies move there. Thanks as well are due to President Reagan and President Clinton. In signing the bill, President Reagan said, and I'm quoting the President, "The completion of this project will achieve important goals, furthering the trade, economic, and diplomatic interests of the United States. Yet, because of chronic scarcity of office space in this medium-sized city, there was pressure throughout both administrations to convert the building into ordinary office space. Both presidents withstood this pressure with the understanding that in the new age of the global economy, this country, this city, and this region could no longer do without a trade center located in its capital. Pat, the World Trade Center in New York City was an early and strong supporter of a trade center here because of the boost to overall trade to come from a one-stop trade center here at the seat of our government. This will become a major destination for all the major groups who journey here, for those who come to do trade, for tourists, and for residents. There is something for everybody and much for us all. Shops and restaurants and many other uses for the public. A showcase for American products and productivity, and workspace for our federal employees. For the district, $45 million annually in business and tax revenues is something that the tax-paying citizens of this struggling city could use just about now. This building did not come easy. Shortly after coming to Congress, I stood in front of the huge hole that had been dug for the foundation and pledged to jump in rather than see the original Congressional Trade Center purpose sidetracked. I want to thank all concerned for saving me the pleasure and the trouble. What has filled this hole is a landmark worthy of an expansive site within sight of the White House. What has filled this hole is a trade building that signals to every other capital that we are not only a trade colossus, we now look like one. What has filled this hole is a center that will not only contribute to our country's trade, but to the economy of the city in which this extraordinary building is located. This building is as grand as its purpose. It is a place to help make the country grow and this city stand tall. Thank you very much.
Mr. President, Mrs. Reagan, Mr. Freed, and distinguished guest, it would be some 2 centuries since Jefferson declared that design activity and political thought are indivisible. As was not infrequently the case, what Jefferson declared, Washington had already done. Having engaged Pierre Charles L'Enfant in 1791 to design a capital that is basically a model of the Constitution, with the Capitol building at the center and a great avenue reaching west to the White House, thus stating both the separation and the connection of power in American government. Both the Congress's house and the President's house, as L'Enfant termed them, were designed in a classical mode to affirm that ours was to be a republic. But invasion followed, then civil war, then little else. But just a century ago, in 1988, citizens of the district began to plan a celebration commemorating the centennial of the removal of the seat of government from New York to the city now named Washington. The American Institute of Architects assembled here to discuss the development of parks and the placing of buildings in what was surely our capital, but did not look much like one. Senator McMillan, chairman of the Committee on the District, passed a resolution creating the Great Commission to be headed by Daniel Burnham. L'Enfant's design for the city was recovered from the archives, and an era of some glory ensued. In 1925, President Coolidge proposed the Public Buildings Act to build a triangular complex along the south side of Pennsylvania Avenue. President Hoover's first Secretary of the Treasury, Andrew W. Mellon, began the work with unequaled energy. so much it would appear that he rather neglected his work as Secretary of the Treasury. In consequence, the stock market crashed and everything stopped, including the Federal Triangle. For one reason or another, everything stayed stopped until President Kennedy drove down the avenue in his inaugural parade. It may have been the first time he troubled to look at the center of the city, but now he did, and he found it in near ruin, as he would later pronounce. And I quote, "A blighted area that is unsightly by day and empty by night. Pennsylvania Avenue should be the great thoroughfare of the city of Washington. Instead, it remains a vast, unformed, cluttered expanse at the heart of the nation's capital." He noted that what was to have been the grand plaza of the Federal Triangle remained a parking lot of surpassing ugliness. A council on Pennsylvania Avenue, headed by Nathaniel Owings, was formed. A plan developed. The president liked it. Perhaps the last request he made before leaving for Dallas was that on his return, there be a coffee hour to show the model to the congressional leadership. Some days later, President Johnson asked Mrs. Kennedy, on leaving the White House, what he could do for her. She replied, "Finish Pennsylvania Avenue. It was something Jack cared about so deeply." And work went on. Under President Nixon, the Pennsylvania Avenue Development Corporation was created and dozens of projects commenced. Then, in 1987, President Reagan proposed that we build an international cultural and trade center, fulfilling President Kennedy's vision that Pennsylvania Avenue should involve a partnership between the government and private enterprise. That parking lot at 14th Street seemed the perfect site, especially as we were also enjoined by law to build a permanent home for the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars on the Avenue. Thus, we served two fine purposes, and it was only right that the grand building itself be named for President Reagan, one of whose many gifts to the American nation is a vision of a world at peace and free to trade. Thank you.
Mr. President, Mrs. Reagan, members of the Senate and the House, distinguished guests, on behalf of all of us who share office space in the Federal Triangle area, let me say it's a wonderful day in our neighborhood. I'm delighted to be here and to welcome the new kid on the block. Of course, our building across the street was a newsmaker in its day. The Washington Post even put out a special edition when it opened. And President Hoover, who laid the cornerstone in 1929, noted that at the ceremony he noted, and he talked about Alexander Hamilton's vision for the federal government. Hamilton wanted to create 6 departments, including one for trade. But even then there were budget constraints, and his proposal was downsized by 1. So it was over 100 years before the Commerce Department was created to promote American business and industry. Now, nearly another 100 years later, we finally have an International Trade Center as part of the new Ronald Reagan building. And it is our good fortune that it is just a handshake length away from the Commerce Department. So along with other trade-related offices, some of our export services will be housed right here in this building. President Teddy Roosevelt, who signed into law the creation of the Commerce Department, used to like to say, that a nation that does great work lives forever. President Reagan's great work was that he ended the Cold War. We obviously all owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to him, for that has freed the presidents who have followed him to create a world where trade and opportunity live forever. Now it will be up to the presidents in the 21st century to use the resources in this building to turn peace into prosperity for all citizens. Let me say that this is a good time to be in business in America. For under President Clinton's leadership, we are approaching the longest peacetime expansion in our history. The American people are enjoying a robust economy, low unemployment, record high home ownership, vigorous wage growth, and a balanced budget. And it is the right time for U.S. companies to continue to look for new markets overseas. In today's global economy, 96% of the consumers in the world live beyond our borders. In 1961, when John Kennedy started the Pennsylvania Avenue project that this building completes, U.S. exports totaled $26 billion. Last year, they totaled $930 billion. Exports are soaring, and so are opportunities. Our challenge is to embrace them and to make every American know that a nation that trades does indeed do great work that lives forever. Let me end on a personal note. Mrs. Reagan, on behalf of all of the people who will come to work every day in this building, please extend our very best wishes to President Reagan. Thank you very much. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our honored guest. Nancy Reagan grew up in my favorite town, Chicago. She met Ronald Reagan in 1951 when he was president of the Screen Actors Guild, and she was an actress. As the wife of a governor and then president, she taught this nation the love for the arts, and she taught our youth to just say no to drugs. But her first priority for 4 decades has been and continues to be her husband. She is caring, charming, gracious, and elegant, and it is a delight to have her back today in Washington. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome me in welcoming Nancy Reagan.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. President, members of Congress, members of the Cabinet, and distinguished guests, I'm of course very moved and very honored to be here today representing my husband. I wish he could be here to see this magnificent building. I extend a heartfelt thank you to everyone, as other people have, to everyone who took part in designing, engineering, and building this structure. I'm especially grateful to Senator Moynihan and Senator Daley for their efforts on the legislation to honor my husband. I'm well aware of the challenges you faced and the difficulties you overcame so that all of us could be here today for this dedication. And I'm particularly happy that the building houses both public and private enterprises. Ronnie would certainly be very pleased that a monument to him embraces his lifelong belief in the importance of a national commitment to free and open trade. You know, Ronnie would never think about whether a memorial or a monument would be dedicated to him. It just simply never entered his mind. I remember one time when we went to Ireland, which of course thrilled him. Reagan, Ireland. And we went to Ballyporeen, where we discovered they had dedicated and named a pub after him. Now, he loved it. He was sincerely flattered, a little surprised that they'd taken the time to do it. But afterwards, he said to me, "You know, I know that presidents get things named after them, but I'll bet you I'm the first president who ever had a pub named after him." Imagine what he would think today. And even though this glorious structure serves as a vivid reminder of him and his work, Ronnie has always believed that America's greatest monuments are the American people. He has such great faith in their optimism and strength. In trying to find the appropriate way to express his thoughts, I found a quote of his that I believe sums up his feelings about remembering America's strengths and honoring them. He said this when he received the Medal of Freedom in 1993. "Some may try and tell us that this is the end of an era, but what they overlook is that in America, every day is a new beginning, and every sunset is merely the latest milestone on a voyage that never ends. For this is the land that has never become, but is always in the act of becoming." Standing here today in this incredible atrium, I think this building too has captured that optimism and strength that Ronnie talks about. After all, Ronnie said there are a lot of worse things to be called than a dreamer. And I hope that Americans and all people who come to visit this glorious space may feel his optimism and take a moment to dream great dreams as well. Thank you very much, and God bless America.
Thank you, Mrs. Reagan. In the last one-third of this century, during my adult lifetime, two presidents have captured the imagination and affection of Americans and connected with us in profound ways. Today, in this magnificent building, we are naming this building after one of them. The other, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing to you today. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Reagan, Mr. Barham, Secretary Daley, Senator Moynihan, Delegate Norton, Senator Dole, Senator Lott, all the members of Congress and the diplomatic corps who are here, Mr. Mayor, Secretary Schultz and General Powell, and all the former members of the Reagan administration who are here and enjoying this great day. Maureen, and to the friends of President and Mrs. Reagan who are here. I'd like to begin by thanking Jim Freed and his team for a magnificent building. I think we all feel elevated in this building today. I also want to say, on behalf of Hillary and myself, a special word of appreciation to Mrs. Reagan for being here. From her own pioneering efforts to keep our children safe from drugs, to the elegance and charm that were the hallmarks of the Reagan White House, to her public and brave support for every family facing Alzheimer's, she has served our nation exceedingly well, and we thank her. The only thing that could make this day more special is if President Reagan could be here himself. But if you look at this atrium, I think we feel the essence of his presence, his unflagging optimism, his proud patriotism, his unabashed faith in the American people. I think every American who walks through this incredible space and lifts his or her eyes to the sky will feel that. As Senator Moynihan just described, this building is the completion of a challenge issued 37 years ago by President Kennedy. I ought to say, and doggedly pursued for 37 years by Senator Moynihan. I must say, Senator, there were days when I drove by here week after week after week and saw only that vast hole in the ground, when I wondered if the Moynihan hole would ever become the Reagan building. But sure enough, it did, and we thank you. As you have heard, this building will house everything from an international trade center to international cultural activities to the Agency for International Development, to the Woodrow Wilson Center for Scholars. It is fitting that the plaza on which we gather bears the name of President Wilson. And it is fitting that Presidents Wilson and Reagan are paired, for their work and therefore the activities which will be culminated in this building span much of what has become the American century. Since President Reagan left office, the freedom and opportunity for which he stood have continued to spread. For a half-century, American leaders of both parties waged a Cold War against aggression and repression. Today, freed from the yoke of totalitarianism, new democracies are emerging all around the world, enjoying newfound prosperity and long-awaited peace. More nations have claimed the fruits of this victory: free markets, free elections, plain freedom. And still more are struggling to do so. Today, we joy in that, but we cannot, indeed we dare not, grow complacent. Today, we recall President Reagan's resolve to fight for freedom and his understanding that American leadership in the world remains indispensable. It is fitting that a piece of the Berlin Wall is in this building. America's resolve and American ideals, so clearly articulated by Ronald Reagan, helped to bring that wall down. But as we have seen repeatedly in the years since, the end of the Cold War did not bring the end of the struggle for freedom and democracy, for human rights and opportunity. If the history of this American century has taught us anything, it is that we will either work to shape events or we will be shaped by them. We cannot be partly in the world. We cannot lead in fits and starts or only when we believe it suits our short-term interests. We must lead boldly, consistently, without reservation, because, as President Reagan repeatedly said, freedom is always in America's interests. Our security and prosperity depend upon our willingness to be involved in the world. Woodrow Wilson said that Americans were participants in the life of the world, like it or not. But his countrymen did not listen to him. And as a result, there came the Great Depression, the rise of fascism, the Second World War. Our nation then learned we could not withdraw from the world. Then a new generation of Americans reached outward in the years after World War II, building new alliances of peace and new engines of prosperity. NATO, the United Nations, the IMF, the International Trading System. It is no accident that during this period of great American leadership abroad, we experienced unparalleled economic prosperity here at home. And it is no accident that freedom's great triumph came on America's watch. Today, on the edge of a new century, the challenges we face are more diverse, but the values that guide America must remain the same. The globalization of commerce and the explosion of communications technology do not resolve all conflicts between nations. Indeed, they create new challenges. They do not diminish our responsibility to lead, therefore. Instead, they heighten it. Because today's possibilities are not tomorrow's guarantees, we must remain true to the commitment to lead that every American leader of both parties, especially Ronald Reagan and Woodrow Wilson, so clearly articulated in this 20th century. For 50 years, we fought for a Europe undivided and free. Last week, the United States Senate took a profoundly important step toward that goal by welcoming Poland, Hungary, and the Czech Republic into NATO, an achievement, I believe, that would make Ronald Reagan proud. The alliance that helped to keep the peace for half a century now brings us closer than ever to that dream of a Europe united, democratic, and at peace. Now Congress has other opportunities to fulfill the spirit and honor the legacy of the man whose name we affix to this building today. Congress has the opportunity to maintain our leadership by paying for our support to the IMF and settling our dues to the United Nations. I hope they will do it. President Reagan once said we had made what he called an unbreakable commitment to the IMF, one that was unbreakable because in this age of economic interdependence, an investment in the IMF is simply an investment in American prosperity. And we fought for 50 years for peace and security as part of the United Nations. In 1985, Ronald Reagan said the UN stands as the symbol of the hopes of all mankind for a more peaceful and productive world. We must not, he said, disappoint those hopes. We still must not disappoint those hopes. President Reagan that understood so clearly that America could not stand passively in the face of great change. He understood we had to embrace the obligations of leadership to build a better future for all. The commerce that will be conducted in this great building will be a testament to the opportunities in a truly global economy America has done so much to create. The academic and cultural activities that will be generated from people who work here will bring us closer together as well. Because the Agency for International Development will be here, we will never forget that the spark of enterprise and opportunity should be brought to the smallest, poorest villages in the world. For there, too, there are people of energy, intelligence, and hunger for freedom. This is a great day for our country. This is a day of honoring the legacy of President Reagan, remembering the service of President Wilson, and rededicating ourselves to the often difficult but ultimately always rewarding work of America. As I stand within the Reagan building, I am confident that we will again make the right choices for America, that we will take up where President Reagan left off, to lead freedom's march boldly into the 21st century. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you all very much for joining us on this special day.
Liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrims' pride. From every mountainside, let freedom ring, let freedom ring, let freedom ring. America, let freedom ring, of thee I sing. America, the sound of beats is calling home to me. A special place to dream your dreams and live forever free. From sea to shining sea, we can rejoice in America's sweet voice. A land of gold, where people strong in hand and long in heart. Where every kind of family is blessed to their one. We'll take care of each other side by side. Our love will be our guide. From where I stand, I see a nation shining bright. A vision of America where voices all unite. Where brothers and sisters alive with peace are standing hand in hand. And hope is running high. From where I stand, America, see the quiet beauty of our country lane. The California sunset or a fresh fall in May. The winds across the plains are still to leave. What a part of the American dream. Our time has come. The dawning of a new day is at hand. A change of heart.